I grew up driving the mountain back roads of western North Carolina. The routes between towns twist like veins through the hills, and I know most of them by heart. Last November, headed home from a late shift, I decided to avoid the interstate and take what I thought was a familiar shortcut. The night was moonless, the pavement slick from a recent rain. My high beams cut across leaning pines, their wet needles flashing silver. A hand-painted sign pointed toward Hollow Road, but I didn't remember that name. Curiosity outweighed caution. The asphalt narrowed and the forest pressed closer. Soon, the only sound was my tires on gravel and a low electrical hum that vibrated in my teeth. I slowed. The air smelled metallic, like coins warmed in a fist. My dashboard clock blinked midnight, even though I'd left work before 10. Then my cell signal vanished. Something large shifted between the trees ahead, just beyond the reach of the headlights. I tapped the horn. The hum stopped. Complete silence. My own breathing sounded too loud. I backed up, tires crunching, but the road behind me seemed longer than before. I drove until I found a faded wooden gate. Beyond it, an old logging path wound downward, but no lights, no houses. My car stalled without warning. Through the windshield, a pale shape moved between the trunks, too tall for a deer, too thin for a man. It bent sideways, then disappeared. I slammed the ignition, engine coughing to life. When I finally burst onto the main highway, my phone chirped with a flood of delayed notifications. The clock read 3:47 a.m. 3 hours gone. During my senior year, a friend named Caleb convinced 3 of us to sneak into the old shale mine near Boone. Locals said it collapsed decades ago, but the entrance gapped like a broken jaw. The cold hit first, a heavy dampness that wrapped around us. Our flashlights jittered against black walls flecked with glittering rock. Every sound bounced back too fast, as if something closer whispered it back. A faint sulfur odor burned our noses. We joked to hide the nerves, until we heard a fourth set of footsteps. Caleb hissed, "Who's behind us?" We turned our lights down the corridor, empty, but when we moved again, the steps returned perfectly timed with ours. The tunnel suddenly split 3 ways. Our breath steamed in the cold as we argued which direction we came from. The smell of sulfur grew thicker, almost sweet. Then a wet exhale brushed my ear. I spun, flashlight sweeping bare rock. We ran. Behind us, the footfalls broke into a sprint. We exploded out of the entrance, lungs burning. Only when the night air hit did the footsteps stop. The next day, the entrance had collapsed overnight. No fresh dirt, no sign we'd been there. I worked nights at a lonely gas station off Highway 321. Winter in those hills bites hard, and customers after midnight were rare. ATM. The rusted payphone outside rang. It had no cord. I stepped out, breath hanging like smoke. Silence. Inside again, I heard a soft tap at the back door. I flipped the deadbolt and peered through the small glass pane. Only snow swirling under the security light. Minutes later, the phone rang again, closer, sharper, as if inside the store. A smell of cold ashes drifted through the aisles. My chest tightened. The third time, the sound came from the tree line itself, an almost perfect mimic of a ringing phone. I locked every door and crouched behind the counter. Through the window, I saw a pale figure half hidden behind a pine, head cocked, mouth open in a perfect O. The ringing stopped. It smiled. When headlights finally swept the lot, my manager arriving for morning shift, the figure melted back into the woods. The payphone never rang again. I was hired to house sit for an elderly couple who wintered in Florida. The farmhouse stood alone on Needham Ridge, miles from the nearest neighbor. The first evening passed quietly, but at midnight, a door upstairs slammed though windows were shut. The next day, I noticed a picture in the hallway, an old family portrait. That night, one of the children in the frame was missing. Lavender mixed with the damp scent of soil drifted through the house. Near a.m. Footsteps descended the staircase. Slow and deliberate, I gripped the banister, heart pounding. A voice whispered just behind me, "Who do you keep the house for now?" I fled into the freezing night, never to return. The assignment should have been easy. Record stream measurements. Submit daily readings. I stayed in a single-room ranger cabin 3 miles from the nearest paved road. The November air smelled of damp cedar and wood smoke. Night stretched black and endless. 2 evenings in, as I logged numbers by lantern light, the floor trembled. A low vibration pulls through the planks, a sound more felt than heard, like a distant freight train. But the nearest tracks were 20 miles away. Stepped outside. The forest was utterly still. No owls, no wind. Only that deep, bone-low hum rising from the earth. By the 4th night, fog crawled through the valley before sunset. The smell of wet stone filled my cabin. Determined to prove it natural, I traced the creek until dusk. Water hissed over slick rocks, but beneath it came that steady pulse. My boots sank into mud warm as flesh. Then came the voices, soft, almost kind. I spun in every direction, lantern casting weak halos. The fog swallowed everything beyond 5 feet. Back at the cabin, a fresh handprint streaked the inside of the glass. Long fingers, dripping. I had locked every door. I packed at dawn, intent on leaving, but the dirt road had collapsed into a slick of black mud. No tire tracks, no exit. Driven by a mixture of fear and anger, I shoveled at the creek bank. The ground quivered under each strike. A hollow opened, breathing heat. Metallic, blight, a soft inhalation rose. Many lungs drawing me closer. My lantern flickered and died. The hum became a low chant that vibrated in my ribs. I stumbled back, mud clinging to my boots like hands. Silence woke me. After days of constant rumble, the absence rang louder than any noise. The cabin floorboards flexed once, twice. A final sigh escaped the earth, warm and damp, carrying a coppery scent. When dawn arrived, Black Briar Creek was gone, bed cracked and steaming. Dozens of fish lay pale and blistered. My radio sputtered to life as if nothing had failed. Weeks later, back home, I sometimes wake to that same subterranean vibration in my chest. Like a memory traveling through bone, the ground under my house feels thinner every day. I arrived on a mild October afternoon, the scent of drying leaves and cold creek water heavy in the air. My job was simple. Record trail conditions for a new park map. By dusk, the forest dimmed to a deep violet, just as I zipped my tent. A golden shimmer pulls below the ridge, steady, rhythmic, like a handheld lantern swinging side to side. I called out, expecting a late hiker. The light paused, then drifted farther from the path. Against better judgment, I followed, flashlight in hand, heart drumming to the beat of distant crickets. The air cooled sharply, carrying a faint metallic tang, like old nails soaked in rain. I forced myself forward, beam of my flashlight trembling. Each step sank into spongy soil that smelled of rust. Behind me, soft crunching matched my rhythm exactly. I spun nothing but black trunks and hanging mist. The lantern flickered ahead, brighter now, almost white. I shouted, "Who's there?" My voice fell flat, swallowed by the fog. A whisper floated back to soft, "I understand." Too close to dismiss. Panic clawed at my chest. The trail, the ridge, even the distant creek noise had vanished. Only the lantern waited, pulsing like a heartbeat in the dark. The clearing opened without warning, stones forming a rough square. No roof, no timber, just a hollow outline of a house. The lantern hovered above the foundation, bright enough to sting my eyes. Heat radiated from the stones despite the cold night. My flashlight sputtered and died. A resinous scent, sharp and acrid, rolled upward as if pine sap burned underground. Then the hum began, a vibration through my boots, a layered chorus of distant voices. They rose and fell like an unseen tide, speaking words I couldn't place yet somehow understood. "Stay." I stumbled back, the ground trembling like a giant's breath. The clearing opened without warning, stones forming a rough square. No roof, no timber, just a hollow outline of a house. The lantern hovered above the foundation, bright enough to sting my eyes. Heat radiated from the stones despite the cold night. My flashlight sputtered and died. A resinous scent, sharp and acrid, rolled upward as if pine sap burned underground. Then the hum began, a vibration through my boots, a layered chorus of distant voices. They rose and fell like an unseen tide, speaking words I couldn't place yet somehow understood. "Stay." I stumbled back, the ground trembling like a giant's breath. I arrived with groceries, notebooks, and the thrill of a weekend alone. The cabin smelled of cedar and old stone, a pleasant mix of wood and cold air. At dusk, the mountains faded into a violet haze. I brewed tea, enjoying the quiet. Close to midnight, gravel popped outside like someone walking. I peeked through the curtain. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, tall and motionless, backlit by the pale moon. "Hello?" My voice felt small. No response. I locked the door and pulled the blinds. The steps resumed, a slow circuit around the cabin. Crunch, pause, crunch. Morning sunlight revealed frost glittering on pine needles. I followed the gravel drive to the tree line. One clear boot track, heel to toe, sank inches into the soil. Then nothing, as if the person had lifted into the air. By late afternoon, fog rolled thick and low, carrying a scent of damp moss. The silence felt padded, like sound itself had weight. After dark, gentle taps began. Left window, back door, right window. Slow, deliberate. I killed the lights. Outside, the figure returned, nearer, his crisp against the mist, broad shoulders, head tilted as though listening. The cabin quivered with each blow. Dishes rattled in the cupboards, knife in hand. I shouted until my throat burned. The knocks migrated. Door, wall, roof, each thud deep as a drum. A whiff of burning pine needles crept down the chimney, though no fire burned. I yanked the door wide. Silence. Fog swirled across the porch like smoke. My breath billowed in the freezing air. Nothing moved. Then behind me, a soft creak from the attic hatch. First light bled pale blue through the trees. I tossed my bag in the car and sped down the winding road, tires skidding on wet gravel. Hours later, I rolled into the nearest town, nerves buzzing. The sheriff raised an eyebrow when I explained. "You stayed up on Whitcomb Ridge?" "Yes," I said. "The cabin—" "There's no cabin," he interrupted, disbelieving. I dragged a friend back 2 weeks later. We found only a silent clearing, grass pressed flat as if something once stood there, but decided to leave. At night, miles away, I still hear that slow, deliberate crunch. Rain sheeted across the windshield like silver cords, my wipers fighting to keep up. I'd been driving since dawn, weaving through back roads after a rockslide closed the interstate. When the thunder cracked like splitting timbers, I saw the flicker of a neon sign through the trees. Hollow Creek Diner. My gas gauge hovered on empty. The lot was nearly vacant. Only a rust-eaten pickup and an ancient sedan sat beneath the lone flickering street lamp. The diner's chrome sides reflected the storm like a distorted mirror. I parked and ran through the downpour. A bell jingled as I entered. Warm air smelling of old grease and damp pine wrapped around me. The place looked trapped in another decade. Checkered floor, faded posters of smoky mountain vistas, a jukebox dark in the corner. Behind the counter stood a waitress with hollow eyes the color of river silt. She smiled, though the gesture never reached her eyes. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice low, deliberate. "Please," I said, shrugging off my soaked jacket. A single man sat in the far booth, face hidden by the brim of a wide hat. He didn't stir, not even when thunder rattled the windows. The waitress returned with a chipped mug. "Storm's bad," she said. "Road'll be washed out soon." I nodded, noticing the silence between clinks of dishes. No kitchen noise, no hum of refrigeration, only the rain hammering the roof. The coffee smelled burnt, metallic. I drank anyway, heat sliding sharp down my throat. "Long way from home?" she asked. I told her about the detour. She stared, unblinking. "Some roads don't lead where you expect," she murmured. The man in the booth shifted slightly, leather coat creaking. I thought I heard him breathe long, slow, like wind through a hollow log. Lightning flared, and for a second the diner's walls seemed to ripple like heat haze. When the flash faded, the air carried a faint odor of wet soil and iron, like a storm had cracked the earth itself. I glanced back. The man hadn't moved, but the brim of his hat now pointed directly at me. The rain dwindled to a mist, but the air outside clung cold and heavy. I paid in cash, no credit card reader in sight, and stepped into the deserted lot. The waitress watched through the window, her silhouette a still shadow behind the neon. The narrow 2-lane road curled like a ribbon into endless forest. My phone lost service within minutes. Fog licked the pavement, thick and milky, turning my headlights into weak halos. I drove slowly, expecting a junction or at least a sign for the highway. Instead, the road kept bending back on itself, each curve revealing another stretch of black pine. The GPS arrow spun like a compass gone mad. Eventually, the screen went gray, except for a single pulsing dot. When I finally found a sign, its paint had flacked to nothing but rust. Another mile brought me to a narrow steel bridge spanning a silent black river. I crossed it carefully, tires humming against metal grates. 10 minutes later, after another series of curves, the bridge appeared again. Same broken guardrail, same graffiti of peeling white paint. A cold prickle climbed my spine. I turned around, retracing every mile. After a half hour of careful driving, I reached the same bridge once more. I pulled over, breathing hard, and killed the engine. The night swallowed the sound. Fog curled around the car like smoke. When I stepped out, the smell of wet earth and iron deepened, sharp as blood. The trees loomed tall and black, their branches merging overhead to block the sky. Something crunched behind me. I swung around, heart pounding. On the damp asphalt leading from the trees to my car lay a trail of footprints. Bare, human, each print larger than my own hand. The trail ended exactly at the driver's side door. Nothing but silence and the slow drip of rain. I got in and locked the doors. My headlights caught a flicker of movement in the tree line, a tall, hat-brimmed shadow that melted into the mist when I blinked. The night stretched elastic, time losing shape. I turned left, right, backtracked, reversed. Each path twisted back toward that same endless bridge. My dashboard clock glowed stubbornly. 2:17 a.m. No matter how long I drove, the digits never changed. I started talking aloud just to hear a human voice. My own words came back muffled, as though the fog swallowed sound. Finally, on my sixth crossing, a figure appeared ahead. My foot slammed the brake. Tires shrieked on wet metal. He stood dead center, a silhouette carved from the mist. Same wide-brimmed hat, same long coat glistening with rain. I flicked my high beams. Light struck him full on, but he cast no shadow. Hey, my voice cracked. Move. No response. Only the whisper of moving water below. Then, slowly, he tilted his head back. The hat brim lifted just enough to reveal the void beneath. Where a face should have been was pure blackness, darker than the night around it, as if light itself recoiled. I slammed the gear shift into reverse. Tires spun, throwing gravel, but the car barely moved. The man stepped forward. One step, another. The smell of iron thickened, metallic and sharp. I pressed the accelerator. The engine roared, but the bridge stretched longer, the distance between us shrinking anyway. His hollow gaze, if it could be called that, seemed to reach inside me, pulling every thought into that emptiness. Desperation surged. I closed my eyes and floored it. When I opened them, the road was empty. Only fog and the echo of my own heartbeat remained. A pale strip of daylight crept across the windshield. Birds called faintly through the lifting fog. My clock flickered too. 17 a.m. jumped to 9 o'clock a.m. in an instant. I drove without stopping, not daring to look in the mirrors. The forest thinned, and suddenly was on a wide state highway under a bright morning sky. I pulled over at a busy gas station miles away. My phone sprang to life with missed messages and a normal map. No hollow creek, no looping roads. Weeks later, the memory still gnawed. I returned with printed maps and a friend. Where the turnoff had been, we found only a collapsed logging trail swallowed by weeds. No diner, no bridge. Locals shook their heads. A town named Hollow Creek? One man said. Never heard of it. Yet some nights, walking home after dark, the air turned sharp with the scent of wet iron. Once, passing a shop window, I glimpsed a long shadow falling across the glass, tall, hat brim low. I spun around. Nothing but empty sidewalk. But I swear, just before the streetlight flickered out, I heard the slow crunch of a single footstep behind me. The inheritance letter arrived in early October, edges yellowed like it had been waiting years. My uncle's name, Harold Whitlow, was stamped in tidy black ink. I hadn't spoken to him since I was a child. He left me his cabin for quiet days and clear thinking. I was between jobs and tired of the city's sirens, so I packed my car and drove east into the Blue Ridge. The farther I drove, the more the modern world fell away. Asphalt gave way to gravel, and cell service died before I reached the mountain pass locals called Miller's Gap. Orange leaves spun through the mist, and the smell of wet earth filled the air. The cabin sat at the end of a narrow track, nestled in a hollow of black walnut trees. A fresh coat of paint peeled at the corners, but the porch stood sturdy. Yet what caught my eye first wasn't the cabin. Across the narrow ravine, half hidden behind laurel and pine, rose another house, tall, slate-roofed, windows dark. My uncle's letter hadn't mentioned neighbors. Its clapboard siding was weathered gray, as if it had been there a century. While unloading supplies, I glanced up and saw a curtain in the upper left window ripple. No breeze stirred the woods. The motion stopped too sharply, as if someone had frozen mid-gesture. I shook it off. Mountain wind could be strange. By evening, clouds thickened and the forest went unnaturally quiet. No chirp of crickets, no rustle of branches, just a heavy hush pressing against the cabin walls. When I looked again toward the ridge, the house's windows seemed to gleam faintly, reflecting a moon hidden behind clouds. They felt less like glass and more like eyes adjusting to the dark. A distant crunch roused me from an uneasy sleep. I lay still, heart ticking hard. Gravel shifted under a measured weight, too heavy for a raccoon, too slow for a deer. I reached for my flashlight and crept to the front window. When I aimed the beam across the yard, the sound stopped. The light sliced through a low, unnatural mist. Trees stood motionless. The porch boards were cold beneath my bare feet. The night smelled of damp iron, sharp and metallic, like water drawn from deep stone. I whispered a greeting, half hoping a lost hiker might answer. Nothing. Back inside, I checked my phone. Dead. The screen glowed, but the time refused to move past 12:03. Eventually, dozed in the chair. Dawn seeped gray across the floorboards. Outside, dew coated the gravel. Across that pale surface stretched a single trail of footprints. They were unmistakably human, long, narrow, and bare. Each heel print held a pool of cold water. The prints came from the ravine and ended at my porch steps, where they turned back, returning toward the ridge. I followed them until the ground slopped upward. At the treeline, the trail simply stopped, as if the visitor had stepped into air. Beyond the laurel thickets, the neighbor's house loomed. Morning light struck its windows, but the glass reflected nothing, only black rectangles like open mouths. The next afternoon, rain returned, steady and cold. Boredom and nerves pushed me to check the crawl space for extra supplies. A trapdoor in the kitchen led down to a low chamber smelling of soil and cedar. Boxes lined the joists. Most held rusted tools and faded photographs. At the bottom of one box, I found a leather-bound journal, edges swollen from damp. The early pages were mundane weather notes, garden plans, but midway the handwriting slanted and darkened. Footsteps again. Midnight. The neighbor watches. Another entry. Curtain moved. No face beneath the brim. He listens through the walls. The final page read, "Never speak after midnight." He copies the sound. A chill slid over me. That evening, the forest turned bruised dark. Rain tapped the tin roof in steady rhythm. I brewed tea to calm myself. Then another sound rose, a faint knock, knock, knock inside the cabin walls. I froze. The tapping moved from one corner to the next, measured, patient. I called out, "Who's there?" Silence. The tapping resumed. Now beneath the floor. My uncle's warning flashed in memory. Never speak after midnight. I whispered his name anyway. Instant stillness. The cabin's silence felt alive. A held breath. From across the ravine came a sound that drained the blood from my body. A voice my own called softly, "Come home." Before dawn, I stuffed my bag and left. Fog lay thick as wool across the ridge. My car's headlights carved a narrow tunnel through the mist. Every turn should have led downhill, but the road kept curving back, revealing the same mossy boulder, the same leaning pine. My heart pounded as the fuel gauge dropped. I gripped the wheel and muttered prayers. After what felt like hours, the trees finally parted and the state highway appeared, bright with pale morning light. Sunlight, though, its strange colors drained. Sky bleached to pewter. Back in town, I told a sheriff's deputy about the neighbor's house. He frowned. "There's only your uncle's cabin up there," he said. "Always has been." Days later, unable to shake the memory, I returned with a friend. The cabin stood exactly as before, but across the ravine stretched only thick pine and bramble. No foundation stones. No path. My friend laughed it off. I forced a smile, though my stomach knotted tight. Now, weeks later, in my city apartment, the night sometimes wakes me with faint knocks inside the walls. 3 taps. Silence. 3 taps. If I strain to listen, a whisper comes soft, exact, and unmistakably my own voice. "Come home."